The laughter at the dinner table wasn't the joyful kind. It rolled through the room like thunder, loud, careless, and cutting. Helen sat at the head of the table, her wine glass untouched, hands folded neatly in her lap, the smile on her face so poised it looked painted on. "I think I'm ready to retire," she said softly, folding her napkin as if it were just another casual moment in a long, ordinary life. Before we get into this unbelievable story, take a moment to hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. For a breathless second, there was silence. Then came the snort. Chloe burst out laughing, nearly choking on her sparkling water. "Retire?" she scoffed. "Mom, what would you even do? You'd go crazy without something to fuss over. You need us to need you." Matt chuckled, leaning back with that familiar smirk that had followed him into adulthood like a shadow. "Come on, Mom. Retire from what? You've basically been semi-retired for years, house, quiet, bills covered, feet up, right?" They laughed harder, not noticing how their words sank into the space between them like cold silverware dropped onto fine china. Helen's eyes didn't flicker, but something shifted behind them, something small, almost invisible. The roast chicken they were chewing on, the designer wine glasses clinking at their fingertips, even the chandelier twinkling above them, every piece had been bought or paid for by her. And yet here they were, mocking the very woman who made their comfort possible. She glanced down at the plate she had served herself last, just like always, and at the tablecloth she had ironed that morning. Around her, they laughed over a meal she'd cooked, in a home she'd co-signed, as if her presence were simply decorative. Later, while she quietly cleared the dishes, Matt disappeared to prepare for a meeting, and Chloe sunk into the couch, scrolling through her phone like the evening had cost her energy. Helen scrubbed a pot, the sponge gliding over its surface in soft circles, her thoughts sharper than ever. They had laughed at her retirement, but soon they would learn what retirement truly meant. Not just from work, but from being their crutch, from being taken for granted, and from mistaking love for servitude. And that lesson would come in silence, elegant, unstoppable silence. That night, the dishes were done, the lights dimmed, and the house settled into its usual rhythm of distant television murmurs and the soft clatter of a keyboard from Matt's home office. To anyone looking in, it was just another evening. But behind the closed door of her small study, Helen sat perfectly still, the glow of her old tablet flickering to life on the desk before her. She hadn't touched it in weeks, maybe months. It wasn't the shared family laptop Chloe used to pay bills or check their shopping list. No, this was the one nobody else knew about. A quiet machine tucked in the bottom drawer beneath old bank envelopes and photo albums. It held no pictures, no memories, just numbers. She tapped the banking app with a finger that didn't shake. It opened instantly, no delays, no need to ask for permission. The screen came alive with a quiet, calming hum. Personal savings, trust reserves, certificates that had matured while no one noticed. Accounts that had grown quietly, patiently, while everyone assumed Helen was just the background hum of their lives, helpful, harmless, invisible. But invisible didn't mean unprepared. She scrolled through the statements, years of careful saving, birthday checks never cashed, reimbursement deposits never claimed, small inheritances from long-past relatives that she'd tucked away instead of spending. There it was, her independence, hidden in plain sight. And in that silence, she felt something strange. Not anger, not pain, just clarity. A long-delayed breath finally exhaled. For years, she'd been their backup plan. The emergency contact, the unpaid babysitter, bill fixer, loan cosigner, emotional shock absorber. And tonight, they'd laughed not just at her words, but at her worth. So Helen made a choice. She wouldn't rage, she wouldn't cry, she would retire. Not just from her job, but from being the life raft for people who never bothered to learn how to swim. Her thumb hovered over the freeze access button for the shared family account. Not yet. Not tonight. First, she'd move carefully, silently, precisely. Because sometimes the most powerful storms begin not with thunder, but with the sound of a door closing softly. Helen didn't rush. She never did. Every decision was made with the calm precision of a woman who had spent decades learning what patience could protect and what silence could uncover. Each morning before the house woke up, Helen made herself a cup of tea and returned to the glow of her old tablet. She began small, a few hundred here, a few hundred there, shifting funds from the so-called family emergency account into a private trust she had quietly created years ago, just in case. No alerts, no raised flags, just a gentle redirection of power, one quiet transaction at a time. But as she scrolled deeper into the transaction history, the word emergency began to unravel. Tulum airfare, spa packages labeled as anniversary relief, one 200 charge to an upscale electronics boutique, another to a luxury gym. There were no hospital bills, no home repairs, no moments of true crisis, just indulgences dressed as necessity. It wasn't support they needed, it was sponsorship. And they had used her kindness like an open tab. Helen's jaw tightened, but her hands stayed steady. She didn't confront them, she didn't question, she documented. Later that week, she walked into the office of a woman named Rachel Geller, a financial advisor recommended discreetly by a neighbor who had once whispered, "If you ever get tired of being their safety net." Rachel was young, focused, and professional. She listened as Helen laid out her intentions with a voice smooth as glass. "I want every asset under my name. No co-signers, no shared permissions. I want full control and full protection." Rachel didn't blink. "Smart," she said softly. "Most people wait until it's too late." Over the next few days, Helen's world shifted quietly on paper. Property titles, retirement accounts, savings bonds, all rerouted into a shield of legal clarity. Her will was updated, her power of attorney reassigned, her accounts made untouchable. She left the office not as someone running from betrayal, but as someone walking steadily toward freedom. Because Helen had learned the hard way, love given without limits becomes currency for the careless. And this time, she wasn't handing out overdraft protection disguised as affection. This time, she was protecting the only investment that had never failed her herself. It started with silence. No grand announcement, no confrontation. Just a quiet tap of Helen's fingertip on a screen that had seen more sacrifices than celebrations. One account. Frozen. The family emergency fund, the very one Matt and Chloe had treated like a bottomless well, was no longer available. No alerts were sent, no warnings given. Just a pause in the system they had never thought to question. That afternoon, across town, Chloe stood at the register of an upscale boutique, her arms full of pastel dresses and designer accessories. She offered her platinum card with a polished smile. The machine blinked, then beeped, declined. Her smile faltered. "Try it again," she said, her voice sugar-coated, strained. The cashier nodded politely, but the screen didn't lie. "I'm sorry," the young woman said gently. "It's still not going through." People in line shifted, coughed, murmured. Chloe's cheeks flushed, her eyes darting to the phone in her hand. She opened her banking app. Error. Access restricted. Panic flickered in her chest. She stormed out, fumbling her phone, dialing with frantic fingers. Matt picked up on the second ring, casual. "Hey babe, what's up?" "My card just declined." "At Vera's, in front of everyone," she hissed. Matt paused. "Maybe it's the bank. Some routine check." "No," she snapped. "It's her. Call your mother." Matt waited until dinner was cleared and the house quiet, the hour he assumed his mother would be softest, most agreeable. He dialed, adding extra warmth to his voice like seasoning to bland food. Helen picked up on the third ring. "Hi, Mom," he said brightly. "Hope you're doing well." A pause. Helen's voice was calm. "Just got back from the garden. What's going on?" "Tiny thing," Matt began. "There's a weird glitch with the bank. Chloe's card got declined. Thought maybe you'd want to check the account?" Another pause. Helen's tone didn't change. "Oh dear," she said. "That sounds stressful." "Yeah," Matt chuckled nervously. "Probably nothing. Just letting you know." Helen smiled into the phone, a quiet, deliberate smile Matt couldn't see. I'll look into it after my nap. Click. Matt stared at the phone in disbelief. In her sunlit study, Helen set the phone down gently. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She was just done pretending. Because some boundaries don't need explanation. They only need to be felt. They didn't confront her directly. Not at first. Chloe did what people like her often do when they feel cornered. She reached for control disguised as concern. An email was sent. To the family lawyer. The subject line read, Power of Attorney Inquiry, Asset Planning for Helen Monroe. It wasn't just a message. It was a warning shot, dressed in civility. The body of the email was sweetly composed, laced with passive concern and urgency. Words like future planning, health preparedness, and ensuring financial security floated between lines that carefully avoided one hard truth. They weren't asking for permission. They were preparing to seize control. Helen saw the forwarded email days later. Her attorney, Mr. Clean, had flagged it with a simple note, Thought you should be aware. She read the message in silence, the soft ticking of her mantel clock the only sound in the room. Her teacup sat cooling beside her, untouched. Her face betrayed no panic, only stillness. A stillness honed over years of being spoken over, used, and underestimated. That night, she pulled out a heavy manila envelope from the bottom drawer of her file cabinet, one even Chloe didn't know existed. Inside were documents most families forget, or choose to. Original loan papers, notarized deeds, and the contract from 10 years ago when Matt couldn't qualify for a mortgage on his own. Helen had co-signed without question. Back then, it had felt like love, like loyalty. She hadn't just signed for the house. She'd saved it. She'd anchored it into existence. And now, unfolding the old contract with hands steadier than her age would suggest, she saw it clearly. Her name. Right beside Matt's. Co-owner. 48% ownership. They had forgotten. Or worse, assumed her signature meant surrender. That it gave them power instead of preserving hers. The next day, Matt and Chloe invited her to a meeting at the law office, all smiles, all syrup. They sat across from her, pretending concern. It's just paperwork, Matt said lightly. You know, in case of emergencies. Chloe chimed in, her tone sweet but rehearsed. We just want to help with the hard stuff, Mom. You've done so much already. They slid a packet across the table. Durable power of attorney, estate access, banking rights, property authority, pre-filled, typed, their names already in place. Helen held the packet gently, like a fragile lie. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply smiled and said, I'll think about it. Later that evening, she sat alone in her study, the house washed in amber light. She reread the deed again, the one with Matt's and her name, side by side. She ran her fingers along the ink like tracing a lifeline. They had tried to trap her in kindness, in obligation, in manipulation made of paper. But Helen had never stopped keeping receipts. With quiet resolve, she opened her laptop, logged into her private legal portal, and began the process of reclaiming every inch of control. The will would be rewritten, the property rights reviewed, the ownership declared. Because the signature they'd ignored, the one they thought had aged into irrelevance, had just become her sharpest weapon. Helen wasn't preparing to fight. She was preparing to finish. Helen didn't scream. She didn't storm out of rooms or throw accusations like knives. That wasn't her way. Her silence had always been sharper, and now it would be surgical. The morning after that lawyer's meeting, the one where Matt and Chloe had tried to slip control papers across the table, like birthday cards, Helen poured herself a cup of black tea and stared at her garden through the window. A breeze shifted the hydrangeas. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside her mind, decisions had already rooted themselves, like steel beneath her ribs. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, only action. By noon, she was seated across from Ms. Geller again, her new financial advisor and estate lawyer, sharp-eyed and graceful, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at words like revoke or remove. I want to revise the will, Helen said calmly. Effective immediately. Ms. Geller didn't ask why. She didn't need to. They opened the files together, pages Helen had once signed with hope, with love, with blind faith. One by one, she removed Matt and Chloe's names from beneficiary lines, healthcare proxies, and estate access rights. In their place, she wrote two names she hadn't spoken aloud in years: Naomi and Lena, nieces from her late sister's side, both now grown women who had once called her Auntie Helen with warm, grateful hearts. They didn't expect a dime from her, and that's exactly why they would inherit everything. Next came the trust accounts. Helen rerouted them all, establishing irrevocable clauses that safeguarded her home, her savings, and her pensions from any legal attempts by Matt or Chloe to reclaim access. It wasn't revenge. It was a correction. The next morning, sipping her tea, Helen received a notification from her bank, not one of her private accounts, but the old family-linked one she had nearly forgotten about. Something didn't sit right. A new login attempt, an account update request. She followed the trail. And there it was. Chloe's name embedded in an online application, trying to list Helen as a co-signer again. A second attempt, buried beneath innocuous language, buried in the trust they thought she no longer monitored. The form had flagged automatically, sending a quiet alert into her inbox like a whisper from a guard dog. That was the final straw. Helen sat up straighter, clicked into her encrypted banking portal, and filed a formal complaint. Subject: identity abuse, unauthorized use of financial signature. She included copies of the flagged applications, screenshots of outdated co-ownership records they'd failed to fully transfer, and even a legal note from Ms. Geller verifying her mental and financial competence, preemptively eliminating the excuse of confusion. Then she made the call. "I'd like to request a formal freeze on all accounts bearing shared access," she told the bank rep, "and initiate identity monitoring, permanently." "Yes, Ms. Monroe," the voice responded professionally. "We've submitted your identity protection request. Is there anything else?" Helen paused. "Yes," she said softly. "Notify me immediately if anyone attempts to access property I'm listed on, regardless of how old the contract is." After she hung up, Helen didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She walked into her hallway, found a dusty old box labeled Matt Mortgage Docs, and placed it in a fireproof safe. She didn't need to scream to be heard anymore. From that moment on, Helen wasn't just protecting her assets. She was protecting her name, her history, her dignity. And the next time anyone tried to sign it for her, they'd learn just how sharp a silent woman could be. The day she booked the cruise, Helen didn't feel triumphant. She felt light, the kind of lightness that comes when you finally lay down a weight you carried far too long for others. No announcements, no dramatic speeches. Just a few clicks from her private trust account, a 1-month Ocean View suite, and a confirmation email that read, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Helen Monroe. Bon voyage." She smiled. That morning, she sat at her kitchen table, sunlight warming her hands as she penned a postcard crisp white, with a watercolor image of a shoreline not unlike the one she'd soon be sailing past. "Enjoy the bills. I'm enjoying the balcony view." She signed nothing, just dropped it into the mailbox at the end of the driveway with the same calm finality she once reserved for signing checks. Meanwhile, across town, Matt and Chloe's carefully built illusion of control began to crumble quietly at first, then all at once. It started with a declined card. Chloe, standing at a high-end boutique, arms full of pastel shopping bags, smiled at the cashier with confidence. One swipe, then another. Declined. She laughed nervously. "Can you try it again?" The clerk offered a polite but firm nod. "I'm sorry, this card is restricted." By the time she reached her car, her mobile banking app showed nothing but red flags. Access denied, account frozen, authorization revoked. She dialed Matt furiously. His voice was already tense. "The mortgage lender just called. They want answers. Fast." Within hours, a cascade of consequences unraveled. A notice from the utility company. A flagged account from the gym. A foreclosure inquiry from the bank. And the most jarring of all, a letter stamped with notice of co-owner partition filing. Matt read it in stunned silence, Helen still owned 48% of the house. And now, legally, she was forcing a sale. Panicked texts were sent. Calls went straight to voicemail. Emails bounced with auto replies. Out of office. Traveling. Because by then, Helen was gone barefoot on a cruise deck, sipping tea as the ocean opened before her. No guilt, no apology, just silence. And peace. The kind that only comes when you finally stop saving people who never once tried to save you. The courthouse was modest, tucked between a florist and a law library, but it might as well have been a battlefield. Helen walked in slowly, wearing a simple navy suit, no frills, no statement, jewelry, just quiet confidence. Her gray hair was swept into a low chignon, and under her arm was a slim folder. Not thick, not dramatic, but inside, years of truth. Across the aisle sat Matt and Chloe. Chloe wore her anger like perfume, overwhelming and sharp. Matt shifted in his seat, unable to meet his mother's eyes. Their lawyer, a young man with a too-tight tie and eyes that flickered nervously, shuffled paperwork like it would save them. The case was simple, at least on paper. Financial abandonment, the plaintiff claimed. That Helen, their mother, had suddenly and cruelly cut off access to family resources they had come to rely on, as if she were a faulty ATM. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and a sharp gaze, sat patiently through the opening statements. Then it was Helen's attorney's turn, Ms. Geller, a woman with the calm voice of someone who dismantled false narratives for a living. She stood, holding Helen's folder lightly in one hand. Your Honor, this is not a case of abandonment. This is a case of boundaries long overdue. Inside this folder, she continued, are decades' worth of financial records, bank transfers, co-signed loans, mortgage payments, credit card clearances. Every transaction clearly traced to Ms. Monroe, not as a legal obligation, but as a mother's grace. She handed the judge the file with care. Each document was labeled. Each signature, time-stamped. Each payment, tracked down to the last dollar. Here's the account Ms. Monroe kept open for emergencies, now shown to be used for vacations, luxury goods, and impulse spending by the plaintiffs. Here's proof that she still holds 48% of a property she helped fund, the very one the plaintiffs claimed as their own. And finally, here's a letter from the fraud department of her financial institution, confirming unauthorized attempts to use her name in mortgage applications. The courtroom grew quieter with every page. Matt looked down at his shoes. Chloe's nostrils flared, but even she had gone still. The judge flipped through the documents slowly, nodding occasionally. Then she looked up, her voice calm but firm. Adult children, she said, are not entitled to lifetime financial support from their parents, not morally, not legally. Ms. Monroe's generosity was not a contract, it was a kindness, and that kindness was exploited. There is no law requiring a mother to ruin her retirement to fund her children's lifestyle. Then came the final blow. The court rules in favor of Ms. Monroe. Damages denied. Legal support upheld. Her estate, her finances, and her future remain hers, and hers alone. Chloe stood up too quickly, knocking her chair backward. This isn't fair, she hissed, her voice cracking with disbelief. But fairness had already been served quietly, thoroughly, and with every receipt in hand. Helen didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply gathered her folder, nodded to Ms. Geller, and walked out into the sun. Because truth doesn't need applause. It only needs to be heard once. And that day, it was. The courtroom victory didn't end Helen's story. It opened a door she hadn't dared imagine before. Not revenge, but reclamation. Back in her quiet coastal home, Helen began writing. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. Page by page, under a pseudonym, she poured her truth into a memoir, not a tell-all, but a guidepost for others. It was honest, quietly sharp, and deeply human. She called it The Cost of Being Needed. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. The truth, as always, could recognize itself, even when told in whispers. Within weeks of its modest release, it spread across forums and support groups. Women wrote, "She told my story. I thought I was alone. I finally found words for what happened to me." Helen's inbox filled not with noise, but gratitude. Meanwhile, Chloe's carefully curated image of victimhood began to crumble. Sponsorships disappeared, followers dwindled, brands distanced themselves from controversy. Then came the final blow, a bankruptcy filing, quiet but undeniable. The influencer who once bragged about brunches and luxury skincare now posted vague messages about starting over and healing. Helen didn't watch. She didn't need to. Instead, she bought a small beach cottage with wide windows and a creaky porch swing, paid in full, in her name alone. It wasn't grand, but it was hers, untouched by guilt or conditions. She joined a mentoring group that supported older women escaping financial manipulation. Once a week, she stood before them and said, "You are not too late, you are not too small, you are not alone." And when she walked home after each session, the ocean breeze in her hair, salt on her lips, she didn't feel like someone who had lost her family. She felt like someone who had finally come home to herself. When the invitation arrived, an email stamped with soft authority, Helen paused. Keynote speaker, Women's Financial Empowerment Forum. They wanted her to speak. Not just about money, but about the cost of silence, of invisible sacrifice, and of reclaiming one's worth. She accepted. Not for attention, not for applause, but for every woman who had been told she was too old, too soft, too small to start over. The night before the event, Helen received another message, this one from Matt. Subject line, "I miss you, Mom." No real apology, no acknowledgement of harm, just vague longing dressed as reconciliation. It ended with, "Can we talk sometime?" She read it twice, then printed it on cream-colored paper, slid it into a weathered wooden frame, and hung it beside her front door. Above it, she etched the words, "Absence teaches more than presence ever did." It wasn't cruelty, it was closure. Helen didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her life now spoke louder than any email ever could. She spent her mornings barefoot on the beach, her silver hair tousled by the wind, riding small waves on a soft-top surfboard. Not perfectly, but joyfully. Afternoons were for mentoring. At each gathering, she stood before a circle of women, some with tears, some with clenched jaws, and said, "You don't need permission to protect your peace." Evenings were quiet. Tea, books, the sound of the ocean humming like a lullaby outside her windows. Helen wasn't just free of financial burdens. She was free of roles she never chose. Free of guilt passed off as love. Free to matter in her own terms. And when people asked what changed her life, she simply smiled and said, "I stopped shrinking to fit a space that no longer held me."